Baker. You would think maybe he's got something better to do while his entire empire burns, but he took time out to call for a ban on all college player prop bets, as if that was going to be the biggest issue in the day. Charlie Baker continues to amaze us all. He does wear a nice suit, though. Joe Anderson joining us, the columnist and the podcaster from Slate, the Hang Up and Listen podcast, very popular. And Joe, thank you very much for being with us. I know you've recently opined a lot about gambling in sports, and we're delighted to have you on. Good afternoon.
Oh, as always, it's a pleasure, Paul. Thanks for having me on.
I know that your piece was prior to what Charlie Baker had to say today, because gambling is pervasive and everywhere you go, sports gambling has taken over. But I just wonder if you had any thoughts on the president of the NCAA being concerned about prop bets for college players.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, when I originally wrote my piece about a month ago, it was sort of about the surreal prospect of having a Super Bowl in Vegas after so many years of the NFL and all these other sports organizations wanting to keep a respectful distance from the city and gambling itself. But I think anybody that follows gambling and sports gambling, I think the real concern is about the involvement of college students and people connected to the college game. They're the ones that are most vulnerable. Most professional athletes, they're getting paid so much, man, it's not really worth it for them to get involved in that low-level stuff. But college athletes are really at risk here. And, I mean, you know, we know just from within the SEC footprint itself, you know, from the Alabama baseball coach, you know, Brad Bohannon to Keyshawn Boutte, who the great LSU receiver from a couple years ago who was betting on himself in game, you know, was betting on LSU games while at LSU. So it makes sense that Charlie Baker would be concerned about that, because that's where people see the potential for some real problems.
And when you talk about young people, it is interesting that we're on campuses all the time, and I can't literally get out of my car before some frat kid comes up to me, doesn't say hello, doesn't want a selfie. He wants to know what I think about his the local team and whether they'll cover or not.
Yeah, no, man, the ubiquity of this stuff. And I mean, I talked to a few people that are gamblers themselves, and people within the industry, and sort of the ubiquity of gambling. It used to be like kind of a thing that older dudes would do, or somebody that had a bookie. Like you had to have some connections, or you were just kind of in the game like that. But, you know, man, all these college students, they have the apps. They can sign up for FanDuel, DraftKings, any Prize Picks, whatever else, and fire it up real quick. And that's where a lot of people that have studied this trend have found the biggest growth in sports gaming itself. The younger set of gamblers, which are young kids, you know, college students, people, you know, 18 to 25 years old, the people that, you know, they may not have their own disposable income, but they've got access to money, and they've got a lot of time, and they've got the most interest in sports at that level. So, yeah, man, I'm not surprised that kids want that. I mean, I know kids that age too, and I'm just sort of surprised that they're not as interested in the game itself, but they're interested in sort of everything around it, you know, the parlays, whatever the potential prop bets are, things like that. And I'm just grateful that none of this popped up when I was a young, impressionable college student.
Joe Anderson Joe, help me with this, because you by asking this question, you can tell I don't bet. But does anyone ever win in sports gambling?
I mean, there are some people, and I know some people that take it really seriously, right? Like, there's some people that really are, like, studying trends and numbers. But if you're like, I mean, okay, let's just say you're not somebody like you and me, people that don't bet, have no interest in it. But if you're like your normal person that, you know, you've got a little bit of time to follow sports, it's not part of your life to keep up with statistical trends or gambling trends or whatever, you're probably not going to be, getting an extra revenue stream for betting on SEC games or anything else for that matter.
And by the way, it doesn't matter to me what people do. I just hope that people know what they're doing, and obviously they don't. Hey, let me ask you about another subject. A guy who could do no wrong in college football. And it's almost as if he hasn't done anything right since he retired. I'm speaking of Nick Saban, who he went to Congress. I don't know whether he got snookered by Ted Cruz or not. Probably wouldn't have been the first time somebody had been snookered by Ted Cruz. But he made a mess, and then he went on Fox News, which is always where you're supposed to clean up your messes, and it seemed like he made it worse. I know you've written about a bigger picture than that, but I am curious about the whole exodus from college sports by some because of NIL.
Well, it's interesting because, I have how can you not have respect for what Coach Saban accomplished over all those years? And I sort of like the way that he ran his program because it's really hard to make the case that the system that has prevailed for so many years was, if you didn't make it to the league, then you can't really argue that a lot of those kids got the most out of their education. So at least I say, well, if you go play for Coach Saban, that's a dude that at least has a real strong possibility of developing you for the NFL, and you can make money and make a career out of it. But, for you to come around after all these years, man, dude, Nick Saban, all the country club memberships, the private plane use, the dude getting, car dealerships, his whole financial situation, and people down in the South, and Paul, what I'm saying, when he came from the Miami Dolphins and how college, Alabama was able to take care of him and to elevate him, and now he is a multimillionaire many, many times over. He has won. Like, he figured out the game, made so much money off college sports, and I don't have a problem with him saying, you know what, I've got an issue with the way the system is run right now. Maybe there's a better way between the portal and NIL. Maybe we can figure out a way to get some more organization around this. But for you to sit up there and say, these kids only care about money, they only are talking to me about compensation, first of all, I find that to be hysterical. Like, that's got to be hyperbole. Nobody is just going to school based solely on what they're getting paid on. They want to go on fit, the way they feel whenever they're on campus, all that other stuff. So I didn't like the way that he tried to malign an entire group of kids and their parents by saying, well, they only care about money, they don't care about development. I think we all know that that's BS, but it sounds like the kind of thing that you may get snookered into saying if you get pulled on the Capitol Hill and you're sitting next to Ted Cruz and you want to emphasize how bad you think things actually are.
Joe Anderson with us. Joe, two more questions, both on basketball coaches who are still in the SEC. I'll start with men's. We understood yesterday in a rather cryptic tweet from the athletic director at the University of Kentucky that the most famous person in that state is going to remain. There weren't a lot of bands playing. In fact, there was a lot of groans, frankly, from friends of mine up there who were actually hoping that John Calipari would leave, and that's incredible to think about when you look at his run. Of course, he had a lot of help. We have the Mitch Barnhart tweet up on the board. I can confirm that he will return. Mitch Barnhart did not say, I'm happy that he's returning, nor did he say that the reason he's returning is because it would have cost us $33 million to buy him out. Your reaction?
Yeah, no, man. I'm sort of torn on this, too. I'm the guy that a few years ago when Georgia fired Mark Richt, I'm like, who the hell does Georgia think they are? This 8-4 program, why would they think they can do better than Mark Richt? And so that's kind of how I look at this Kentucky situation. But then I realized, and if you look at Coach Calipari's predecessors, most of them had done much better over this amount of time. Like you stack, there's one Final Four appearance in the past decade, one SEC tournament win in like the last 4 to 5 years. So I can understand why Kentucky fans are a little frustrated, and they're like, we should be getting a little bit more out of our investment there. We don't, there's no reason for us to assume that we have to stay at this level. But I guess the thing that I always think about is that, people always think that they can do better, but sometimes you become Indiana basketball. Sometimes you become Arkansas football, and people don't see the other side of that. It's like when you force somebody out who's been really good for a very long time and you take winning for granted, it doesn't mean that you're going to get the next guy and you're going to get right back on top. Sometimes you take a step back. And so if Kentucky is thinking of getting rid of Coach Calipari, I understand it, but there's another side to that, and they can look at some of their rivals on either side of them, Louisville or Indiana, and see how bad things can go for them.
And finally, Joe, Kim Mulkey, who is hard to miss if you're watching a college basketball game these days. But she did something on Saturday. She went after the Washington Post and a reporter who has a very good reputation, blasting them about a story that none of us have seen. And what's really even more interesting than that is we've already had a number of callers, mostly from Louisiana, who have supported her and have proclaimed that the Washington Post is out to get her, even though we have no earthly idea what this story is about, although we have some inkling of it. That's complex, I realize, but this has become not quite Caitlin Clark, but it's going to become a huge story as this, if we ever see the Washington Post story. What do you make out of all this?
Well, we can't take our directions from LSU fans. I mean, when I was at ESPN years ago and wanted to do a profile on the former running back Darius Geis, and I remember I didn't get access to him that weekend, right? And then later it came out all this other stuff, and LSU fans thought, "Oh, why are we on this dude?" And when the allegations against Coach Orgeron and how he was treating people and his behavior on the way out of there, people didn't want to hear it. So it's really tough to take LSU fans seriously on this. And I understand, they like this thing. Coach Mulkey has brought some prominence and has, built a great program there. So I understand why they're inclined to believe her. But I would just say it doesn't cost you anything to just wait to hear what the allegations and what the piece is going to be first. And that's what I think if I were them, and particularly the players. I hope LSU's SID department and people around them have told them or warned them what's going to be coming out in that piece, because they're going to look really foolish if there's some, more insidious stuff in there than we know about right now or suspect that might be in there, because they could wind up looking pretty dumb. So I just, I don't think that, all this hoopla, before we get into it, I don't think it's going to be merited. I don't think that, the Washington Post is going to report anything that's going to get Kim Mulkey fired. But I do think that people should sort of hold their fire, just wait till it gets published, and then we can render judgment about whether or not this is a hit piece or the Washington Post is biased or whatever else. I mean, we've got time, right?
We do, Joe. One thing I'm just glad that people don't prejudge things about news and politics like they do in sports. They just let the facts speak for themselves.
Oh yeah, the facts always speak for themselves. Right.
Joe, it is always a pleasure to have you on. Thanks so much. You be well.
Oh man, my pleasure. Thanks. Anytime.
What a fantastic conversation. As we covered a lot there. We will take a break. More on Calipari later on with Michael Eaves from ESPN. He has a few thoughts on the decision to retain Cal and your phone calls.